My name is Theowarner, and I run a YouTube channel on YouTube called Theowarner. And I'm in this video will probably be very long, and it's going to be a conversation with another YouTuber who goes by the name billzybobb. And billzybobb, why don't you introduce yourself?
This is billzybobb. If you've ever been to my channel, you should know me pretty well, and I'd like to thank everybody who watches this.
Would you like to say something about what we're doing here?
Well, my channel is basically, I'm simply out to destroy superstition in all its forms. God belief to me is one of those superstitions, and as an atheist, I'm taking on the challenge of ridding the world of it. In my opinion, anyone who believes in a God or believes gods exist is someone I have to convince they're wrong. And I believe you're one of those people, and I'm here to see why you believe this stuff.
That's very interesting. One of the videos that I made was a video about how there are two groups of people who really want to know how you answer the question, do you believe God exists? I would say that these are Christian fundamentalists, and another group of people, these very vocal atheists, who also ask this question. And the reason that they're asking is not because they're curious about people or they want to have conversation. It's because they're there pretty much to shit on your beliefs and to try to convert you to some other mindset. I personally find it tremendously offensive when a Christian sort of evangelical person walks up to somebody and tries to start converting them. That's sort of Ray Comfort and sort of mentality. It's sort of aggressive, militaristic evangelicalism, and I think it's deplorable. So I guess that's what you're doing. So I guess that's what you're doing, too.
I don't know how you see that. I'm out to just eradicate superstition. If you don't believe God belief is superstition, well, we'll just have to disagree there.
Well, what's wrong with superstition, out of curiosity?
It retards the world. It holds man back. It's the opposite of reason, logic, science. Science is progress. Superstition is, it's a detriment to all things.
That's right. I agree with you, but maybe you could answer the question. Why is it bad? You've defined what bad is.
I've defined what superstition is. That's what superstition is.
What do you think superstition? Just the opposite of reasoning?
Yes, it is a detriment to humanity. It is bad. It retards progress. Let's take a look at, say, global warming.
Okay.
You have many Christians saying there's no such thing as global warming.
Yes.
Well, scientists say it's global warming. I've heard actually Christians say that God said it would never destroy the world again, as in Noah's flood. Mm-hmm. So global warming doesn't have to be worried about. We don't have to worry about taking care of our planet. That's the epitome of superstition, what it does to the world, what it's doing to us. And I
agree with what you're saying, but I think that it's worth making this very clear. I think that what you're saying is that the problem is when Christianity trespasses into something like a scientific question, like does global warming exist and what are its causes?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
That's not what you're saying. You're saying it doesn't matter.
I'm saying it doesn't matter if it's Christianity. It doesn't matter. It doesn't even have to be religion related. It's the superstition itself.
So I guess what I'm asking you is it the superstition itself that bothers you, or is it the consequences of the superstition when it does things in the world? is it the superstition itself that bothers you, or is it the consequences of the superstition when it does things in the world?
That's what I'm talking about, the consequences.
Okay, so
the result is.
Okay, so then I was right.
Superstitions.
Yeah. Okay, so I was right when I said that that your concern is when Christianity trespasses into something like a scientific question. It doesn't seem to me that you're. It seems to me that you're. If you're concerned about the consequences of superstition, then to a lesser extent you would be concerned about the superstition intrinsically. Extent you would be concerned about the superstition intrinsically.
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't matter if it's Christianity. It's the superstition itself.
Yeah. So if I had a superstition, for example, that did not trespass into some sort of issue of science or some sort of public harm, would you have grounds to object?
I object to all superstition.
I'm sure you would, but would you have grounds? I mean, you've talked about consequences, and I'm curious about those superstitions which don't seem to have a consequence. Or
all superstition has a consequence.
Really? What about the consequence? What about the superstition of not going under a ladder?
Yeah, they hold the superstition that walking under a ladder is going to cause harm to them. That superstition is causing harm to them.
How?
It is retarding them. That superstition will affect other areas of their life.
How?
But if you can carry one superstition, you can carry another superstition.
So the danger of any superstition is ultimately some sort of external consequence.
Yes.
Okay, so you're not really moving beyond the issue of there are consequences to superstition, and I join you in saying there are consequences to superstition, but this so far what you've said doesn't amount to the idea that superstitions are intrinsically bad. And
yes,
secondly, you expose yourself to the problem of what about superstitions that have positive consequences?
A positive consequence from superstition.
Sure.
Superstitions are all negative. They're false. Superstitions are all negative. They're false.
Why? Why are they negative?
Because they're false.
So what?
Falsehood is a negative.
So?
Well, if negatives are not negative to you, well, I don't know what else I can tell you.
Well, you haven't explained why it's negative. You've simply said that it is.
Superstitions are all negative. They're false.
Why? Why are they negative?
Because they're false.
So what?
Falsehood is a negative.
So? You've appealed to consequence in evaluating superstition otherwise, and I guess what I'm saying is that it seems to me like if to answer the question why is superstition bad, you're going to have to consistently say for some sort of consequence in the real world, something that crosses into an ethical or civil or political territory, or that the badness is inherent to the thing itself.
The badness is inherent to superstition, and it retards the superstitious person.
Okay.
The superstitious person may not affect the world around him or her in any way.
Okay.
But that superstition is affecting them. It is retarding them. So superstition is a negative, period.
Okay. How is it retarding them? In what aspect is it retarding them?
It destroys their reason. It stops them from exploring, from doing things, from evolving.
Okay, I mean those are fine. I accept those as answers to the question. I'm well aware of religious traditions that encourage reason, that encourage exploration, that encourage, I think, things that would be considered profoundly good, like self-discipline, like having a calm and ordered mind. Like having a calm and ordered mind strike me as religious virtues that are often celebrated by religion.
Those have nothing to do with religion. Those have to do with humanity.
You mean that those have nothing intrinsically to do with religion. But if you remember, we were concerned about the consequences of superstition, and my point is that there are consequences to superstition that are obviously good.
You weren't talking about superstition there.
I was talking about you've said that religion is amounts to a superstition. You've said that religion is amounts to a superstition, and so I'm playing along in that for that moment and saying that there are religious traditions, superstitions that encourage reason, that encourage exploration, that encourage evolution, and so forth. And so I find your comments that religion retards the individual to be partially true and partially not true. Retards the individual to be partially true and partially not true.
No, it's completely true. What you're confusing my statement with is this. A superstition is a negative. Because someone writes a book saying that unicorns live in his basement's furnace, that's superstition. If in his book he says you should also be good to each other, because I think you should be good to each other, that is not superstition. That is simply someone saying you should be. There's a distinction between superstition and helping an old lady across the street.
Why?
That's not superstition.
Why is there a difference? If I have a superstition which encourages me to help old ladies cross the street, that's not a difference between those two things. It's the result of the superstition.
No, the superstition is believing you have a unicorn in your furnace. Helping someone across the street is a human value.
Hold a second. You're drawing arbitrary lines here, and you're not.
No, let me finish. So if you want me to answer your question, I'll finish. Helping an old lady across the street does not come out of superstition. It comes out of yourself, humanity.
Why doesn't it come out of superstition?
Because superstition is that you have a unicorn living in your furnace.
What about the superstition?
Across the street about
but what about the superstition that the unicorn in my furnace also wants me to help old ladies across the street?
That's coming out of your head. You're projecting what you want onto your unicorn in your furnace.
So what?
Well, if you can't see the difference, I can't help you anymore.
No, I see the difference, and the difference it strikes me that you've decided that all the positive aspects in the world, all the positive things that people do, derive from a rejection of superstition as opposed to derive from the superstitions themselves. Which strikes me is essentially it's the no true Scotsman's fallacy. It's the no true Scotsman's fallacy, and frankly, again, there are plenty of superstitions, religious traditions, for example, that encourage very positive things. I don't I don't see why that's so reprehensible. I don't see why that's a fact that you can't acknowledge. There are religious traditions that encourage good things. Charity is a virtue inside Christianity. It's also a virtue outside of Christianity, but it's also a virtue inside Christianity. Right?
All right, I'll try this one more time.
Okay, yes or no? Is charity a virtue within Christianity?
No.
No, it's not. Okay, Christianity and charity are strangers passing in the night.
They have nothing to do with each other.
Nothing to do with each other. Okay.
Not a single thing.
Not a single thing. Okay.
All right, now I'll try to explain this again.
Okay.
Superstition is, like I say, this unicorn lives in your furnace. Say no one ever heard of unicorns. The concept of unicorns didn't exist. You saw an old lady that wanted to get across the street, you helped her across the street. Whether the unicorn told you to do it or not has nothing to do with the unicorn. As you were helping the lady across the street, you fell and bumped your head, and you discovered at that moment there was a unicorn living in your furnace that wants you to help people across the street. Does that make sense?
No, I think that's a very poorly worded analogy.
All right. Well, then we'll have to agree to disagree on that.
Okay, so what we're disagreeing on is whether or not Christianity promotes charity. And you say it doesn't, and I say it does. So that's our disagreement.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let's move on to another issue. Most of your videos had to do with what's wrong with me or what's wrong with what I was saying. So I'm hoping to get to those. Let's see. What else did I say?
Neil deGrasse Tyson is not an atheist.
Ah, yes. Neil deGrasse Tyson and Stupid Atheists was the name of the video.
I think you were saying in the video that Neil deGrasse Tyson claimed he wasn't an atheist, that he was an agnostic. And I posited he is an atheist, whether he likes to accept the label or not. Now, this is not by the human standards, of course. An atheist...
This is not by the what?
By human standards.
What is it? By
the God's standards. According to the God, you must believe, you must accept, or you're going to hell. It's as simple as that. So
wait a second. I'm sorry. Hold a second. What are you talking about?
I'm talking about religion.
Okay, the gods?
I'm using possessive, yes. The God's standards. God''S.
Yeah, okay. The gods.
So right. The God's standards.
I've never heard God referred to as the God, but I'm laughing at that. I've never heard God referred to as the God, but I'm laughing at that. First of all, and second of all, I'm not sure what I don't know very much where are you getting this idea from that the God says anything about atheism? Because as far as I know, the God doesn't.
You have a tendency to stop me in my middle of sentences, but I'll try to get it.
Well, you can stop me in the middle of my sentences. You can step it up a bit if you want to. But go ahead. I don't know what you're talking about. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Neil deGrasse Tyson says he's not an atheist. He's an agnostic.
Yeah.
Now, those are his standards. Now, let's use the God's standards. It could be any God standards. If that God wants you to believe it exists. Now, does it want you to believe it exists, or do you have to believe it exists? Now, every God I've ever heard of gives you a choice. You are to accept what it says, you are to believe it exists, or you go to hell. So by the God's standards, Neil deGrasse Tyson is an atheist. There is no in-between with the God. That was my point when Neil deGrasse Tyson said he isn't an atheist, and you seem to agree with him. Human standards don't matter to the God. Only its standards matter. That was my point.
Okay. Well, Yeah. I mean, I don't know how to respond to that. To me, that's incoherent. You're inventing a God who condemns people for some standard that I'm not even quite sure what it is, but I guess not believing in God, I guess, is the standard. I guess not believing in God, I guess, is the standard.
Yes, not accepting it.
And then you think that God also uses the word atheist in his condemnation.
No. All right, let's take, for instance, a particular Christian denomination. Take, for instance, a particular Christian denomination. It doesn't matter. Let's say it believes in a hell and a heaven exists.
Sure.
So the God that gave them this religion tells them to evangelize to others that you must believe this, you must accept this, or you're going to go to hell.
Yeah.
So one person says, or Neil deGrasse Tyson comes along and says, I'm not an atheist, I'm agnostic.
Okay.
And a theist, one of the theists that worship this God may say, I'm not an atheist, I'm a theist, but I don't know if this God exists. Mm-hmm. Being an agnostic, saying you're an agnostic or you're a theist, but agnostic about it, isn't acceptable to the God, is what I'm saying. You must believe, you must accept. There is no in between, or you go to hell.
Right.
Is my point.
So Neil deGrasse Tyson says that he doesn't like the word atheist and doesn't use the word atheist. And you point out that there are stupid religions that say stupid things, like he would be going to hell anyway. He would be going to hell anyway.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Under those religions,
yes,
it doesn't matter.
So, I mean, I agree with you. I agree with you, by the way. There are stupid religions that make that stupid claim. I don't particularly think it's interesting to point that out. I don't particularly think it's interesting to point that out, but if that's what you were just pointing out, then that's fine.
Well, I thought you were agreeing with Neil deGrasse Tyson.
I was agreeing with Neil deGrasse Tyson that labels get in the way of conversation, and that there should be an intellectual effort to try to move past what labels are and what are the actual arguments at hand.
So then, going by the God standards, you believe Neil deGrasse Tyson is an atheist?
No, I don't know what you mean by going by the God standards in that case. That's not relevant to what I believe. In the sense that what I'm saying is, I think that labels get in the way of things, and we should try to move past labels and try to get to the actual arguments at hand. Having said that, God, I don't think any God would say no. Labels are important. The opinions, the arguments are not important. No, labels are important. The opinions, the arguments are not important.
All right, then I'll ask you this. We'll jump to some of my questions about your religion. Do you believe a heaven and a hell exists?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not particularly committed. Are you a Christian? I'm not particularly committed. I don't like the word Christian because I think it invites connotations that.
Then tell me what you are. You said you would discuss this.
Sure, I'm happy to. I mean, I'm pretty okay with being called a Roman Catholic. That, for the most part, gets.
So they're not Christians. So they're not Christians. What does it take to be a Christian? Do you have to accept Christ, believe Christ existed?
Well,
that makes you a Christian, or is a Christian whatever anyone can say it is?
Yeah. Well, this is a wonderful example of why labels get in the way of conversation, because you have now now what we're going to do is talk about the relationship between these words. And so we've stopped talking about my religious beliefs, which is what you wanted to talk about. But we can set them aside and let's go talk about these words.
If you don't believe this is about your religious beliefs, that's good for you. But no, it is.
But excuse me, but it's not. The relationship between the word Christian and the word Roman Catholic has nothing to do with what I personally think about it. Has nothing to do with what I personally think about it, or my personal beliefs about cosmology or metaphysics.
So you're saying Roman Catholics are not Christians?
So let me address that statement there. Let's talk about labels, because that's a label theory question. That's a question about how do these groups relate to each other.
So all you have to do now is just tell me what a Christian is, and
so let me
you're not that.
Let me answer your question about the relationship between these two words, Christian and Roman Catholic. So obviously, if the word Christian is emptied of its specific meaning and is held generally, then yes, Roman Catholics are Christians. If you want to take the word, if you hold on a second, hang on a second.
You're gonna have to clarify what if it's stripped of its padding. What does that mean? Stripped of what? Of Jesus?
Stripped of its specific meaning. So for example, if you think, or if my interlocutor, whoever I'm talking to, thinks that the word Christian refers to a belief that God is a three-personed thing, is a triune God, as it's called. Then, for example, you would be excluding large groups of people who call themselves Christians. You would be excluding large groups of people who call themselves Christians. And so, right? You understand that, right?
No, that doesn't wash with me. I'm sorry. So Christianity wouldn't exist. It doesn't exist. If anyone could say what Christianity is, if it's not up to the God that created it. If it's not up to the God that created it, then
you keep saying up to the God that created it, like there is a God.
Where does religion come from? Does it come from people or a God?
Are you asking me, or are you asking?
Yes. Where does it come from? Why are you religious? Why? If you,
all right, you're asking about six different questions at once, and I feel like I didn't answer. Related. I feel like I haven't answered your question about the relationship between the word Christian and the word Roman Catholic, which was a question from a while back.
Sorry.
And so I said that if you empty the word Christian of its specific meanings, of all of its specific connotations, and make it as general as you can, then Roman Catholics are certainly Christian. My issue with the word...
I have no idea what that means.
Okay.
Strip it of what? Strip it of Christ?
Strip it of its connotations. So do you know what a connotation is?
My connotation of Christianity is that if you don't accept Jesus, you go to hell.
Okay, so that's a really great example. That's a fantastic example.
So if you strip that connotation from Christianity, you've obliterated Christ.
No. What you've done is you've said that, so let's say you add that definition to the word Christianity, that Christianity necessarily requires people to believe that if you don't believe in Jesus, you go to hell, right? Then you would be excluding from the word Christianity large groups of people who call themselves Christians who don't hold to that particular belief.
And my point is, if Christianity is anything anybody wants to say it is, it does not exist. If Christianity is anything anybody wants to say it is, it does not exist.
Okay, you don't seem to understand how words work. Let's step away from religion and the metaphysical entity God, because you seem to think that that's relevant in terms of definitions. Let's just talk about
relevant to
let's talk about books. We all know what books are, right? Books are these things, right? Now, let's say let's talk about the definition of a book. Would you say that a book has to have a cover?
Yes.
Okay. So what happens when I remove the cover of a book? Does it cease to be a book?
No.
Okay. So you were wrong when you said that books have to have covers.
No.
Yes, because you just pointed to the existence of something that doesn't have a cover and is a book.
You didn't define cover. If you remove what you call the cover, there's still a cover on the book. It may not be the cover you removed.
All right, let me get this straight. If you remove the cover, there is still a cover. That's what you're saying.
Yes. That first page becomes cover.
Oh. Oh, okay, the first page. Okay. All right. So you're right. You're very clever. That's very clever. Let me come up with a different definition let's talk about fish. Do fish have to be able to swim?
I guess not.
Okay, very good. So you were right on that one. Do you know the question of definitions? I mean, have you ever heard this theory before? The problem with definitions?
Well, hey, I can accept any definition as long as someone, gives me a reason to accept it. I mean,
the problem with definitions is always that when you attempt to define something, you almost invariably exclude from the group that you've tried to define some people or some things that are typically included within that definition. I don't think you could come up with the definition of the word chair, and you wouldn't somehow be excluding some things in the world that some people would call chairs.
Well, I see what you're trying to say, but I'll put it this way. Chairs are defined.
Okay, what are they?
Things you sit in that are made by human beings.
Ah, they're made by human beings, you say. What about...
Yes.
Okay.
Well, let me finish.
All right.
Someone may take a big boulder into their house.
Right.
And they may sit on it, and they may say, well, I'm going to call this a chair.
Yes.
Now, that is not a chair.
It's not a chair. They're lying when they call it a chair.
Chairs have been designated. If it doesn't fit within the designation of a chair, it is not a chair. Otherwise,
you don't understand
a chair can be a CD. It can be a house. It can be a bed. It could be my sneakers.
Well, no, I don't think that's the problem. The problem isn't that then we have to deal with things that are exceptional. I think that what we have to do is just simply say that definitions are valuable up to a point, but let's not run amok. That there are obviously
definitions are the only things we have. Without definitions, we have nothing.
No, that's not true. We have reasoning, and we have the meeting of the mind.
If a car can be anything, and I asked you to come pick me up to take me over to the circus, in your car,
yeah.
what are you gonna do?
Well, I mean, you asked the question. I mean, what if I showed up in a bus? Well, no, I don't think that that's the problem. The problem isn't that then we have to deal with things that are exceptional. You asked the question. I mean, what if I showed up in a bus?
That's not a car, it's a bus.
All right. Well, I mean, if I said to you, "Well, sorry, it's my car." I mean, if I said to you, "Well, sorry, it's my car. My car is a bus." What would you say? I mean, it's there.
I would tell you.
And by the way, there are lots of examples of things that confound any definition of the word car. I mean, for example,
answer that question you asked. What would I say to you?
I mean, is the thing that the Flintstones? Hold on a second. Is the thing that the Flintstones drove? Is that a car? You know, their little log. Is that a car?
If you showed up in a bus and you called it a car, I'm going to tell you that's not a bus because cars have been defined.
By who?
By humanity.
By people. Right. Minds got together and made an agreement.
So this is my point. If humanity has defined what a car is, but you can say what a car is, then anything, and you want to ascribe that to all humanity is able to do this, then anything can be a car. Christianity can be anything now. It doesn't matter who says it is or what it becomes empty. It's useless now.
No. You express perfectly the fear that fundamentalists have when it comes to the idea of definitions, and I am entirely sympathetic. I understand that position. It's not an uncommon one. It has existed every time there's been progress in the world. People like you come along and say, well, what about the definitions of things? I mean, this is you fundamentalist types are making this argument now with the idea of gay marriage. Now with the idea of gay marriage, you're insisting that marriage is defined by people, and that it's already defined. We can't. We can't have some other definition.
In fact, importance to you.
In fact,
I'm glad I don't live in that world, because that world. Hey, you.
What do you mean that world? That's the world you are talking about. You're saying that's the way it is.
That definitions don't matter.
I live in a world where I believe that definitions are not. I mean, they're important, but they're not infallible. I think
all humans have, unless you believe there's something beyond humans.
What? Say that again?
Definitions are all humans have, unless you believe there's something beyond humans.
What do you mean that all humans have? What do you mean by that? What does that mean to you when you say all humans have?
All humans have in this world to rely on are humans. If what humans designate something as is not its designation, there's nothing left to designate it for you. You will show up in that bus when someone asks you to bring a car.
Okay, so let me. You realize that a lot of definitions that exist today didn't exist once upon a time, right?
A lot of things today didn't exist once upon a time.
Cars. So, for example, the difference.
I wouldn't assume the definition of a car would exist when cars didn't exist.
Exactly. So, at some point, we had to come to an agreement about what words mean, right?
And know what things are.
What definitions mean, excuse me. So at some point we had to come to an agreement about what words mean, right?
And know what things are.
What definitions mean, excuse me. Right? We had to come to an agreement.
No,
we didn't come to an agreement.
It sounds to me like you're talking about the definition of the word definition.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about definitions.
Of
the meaning of words. We could say the meaning of words if you want to.
The meaning of the word car is what you're saying.
Yeah, or anything new. Like when vlogs started to appear, we had to come up with a definition. What does that word refer to, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, and you understand that that definitions change over time, right?
Yes.
Okay, so having agreed now that definitions emerge from consensus, definitions change over time, what is it then about that makes you feel that if we have difficulty defining something, it doesn't really exist?
Man, let me see.
That if we have difficulty defining something, it doesn't really exist.
All right, take a rock and a tree.
Okay.
Someone asks you they've heard of a rock, so they ask you what a rock is.
Okay.
You point to the rock and say, that's a rock.
Sure.
They say, no, that's a tree. You say define a tree for me. They say a thing with leaves and roots and takes in sunlight to convert energy to food.
Right.
And you tell them that is not the definition of a rock. That is the definition of a tree.
Mm-hmm.
So that thing you pointed to and said was a tree is not a tree. It is a rock.
Okay.
That is all humans have to rely on.
Okay.
There's nothing else there. So
Yes,
if we cannot define things, if things that have been defined cannot, if you don't know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about something, language.
And I have to say that your apprehension, I think, is misplaced, because people generally don't confuse what you mean when you refer to trees and rocks very much. Those are not.
Yes, but
that's
they
not
would by yours. They would by your worldview.
No, I don't think they would, because I think that the difference between
you said you'd show up in a bus when someone said a car.
Well, cars and buses there are examples of things that are similar to both cars and buses, and you would have difficulty.
Well, all right, now we're
hang on a second, because you're missing.
All right.
What if I showed up in a bus?
That's not a car; it's a bus.
All right. Well, I mean, if I said to you, "Well, sorry, it's my car." And buses, and you would have difficulty.
Well, all right, now we're
hang on a second, because you're missing. Hang on a second, you're missing something, because there are things that confound our ability to draw the distinction between a car and a bus. Obviously, I mean, you talked about a tree and a rock, and there's very little that confounds our ability to define the difference between a rock and a tree. There is a great deal, for example, that confounds our ability to define the difference between a bush and a tree, though.
In your world of trees and bushes could be considered the same thing. I guess that's what you're saying about Christianity. Whatever the person says it is, that's what it'll be.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that definitions.
You can't distinguish a tree and a bush by its definition.
No, again, hold on a second.
Specific definitions.
Hold on a second.
Then a tree and a bush become indistinguishable.
There are examples of species that do not make it easy for us to draw distinctions. That do not make it easy for us to draw distinctions between bushes and trees. There are distinctions within Christianity. There are distinctions within Christianity that make it very difficult for us to talk about. Does this particular group of people exhibit the features of Christianity or not? Does this particular group of people exhibit the features of Christianity or not? I mean, that's a very common thing. Unitarians are a great example of a group of people who people really do have issues with. Do they believe in? Are they Christians or are they not Christians? That's a traditional example of a group of people who we really have to sit around and think about. We have to examine their doctrines very closely.
All right, you just said if they're Christians or not Christians. So why don't you define a Christian for me, if it's possible, by your worldview?
Well, I try not to define words like.
By your worldview.
Well, I try not to define words like.
Because it is impossible by your worldview.
Well, I'm not sure it's impossible. I'm not sure it's impossible. I would say that
it is.
I would say that it's
give it a shot.
Very difficult.
Just for me.
Just for you, okay. What is it? What is a Christian? I mean, I would say that Christians are a group of religionists who subscribe to to a version of the teachings of Jesus Christ, who believe.
How many versions did Jesus put out?
I'm sorry?
How many versions did Jesus put out?
How many versions did he put out?
Yes.
What does that mean? What do you...
You said they subscribe to a particular version of Jesus' teaching. So I'm wondering how many versions Jesus put out.
Well, I'm not saying that they subscribe to one particular version. I'm saying they subscribe to
So there are many versions.
Yeah.
Jesus' teachings.
Are
they Jesus's or are they yours and those other Christians?
As I am explaining to you, when you ask me to define a Christian, and what I'm trying to do is to draw a circle around a group of diverse people who disagree. So obviously there's disagreements between them, right?
But But you can't tell me what they're disagreeing on, can you?
They're disagreeing on the doctrines of their religion.
And what are those doctrines?
There are many. I mean, the status of the afterlife, the nature of salvation, the status of the resurrection. These are all aspects of disagreement.
So then it's not the people that are confused. It was Jesus and the guy.
Where do you get that from?
Well, if people can't understand what this Jesus was saying, if it's left up to them to interpret what it means, then it doesn't exist.
Where do you get that from? That doesn't make any sense. People disagree about religious teachings. That doesn't intrinsically mean that there is no metaphysical reality behind their beliefs at all. I mean, that's absurd.
Their beliefs come from a particular person, this Jesus.
Yes.
Now, if Jesus told these people what something is, Jesus said, I don't want you to pee on Sundays in bushes.
Okay, let's take that as an example.
Some people pee on Sunday in bushes, and then someone comes up to them and said, Jesus said not to do that.
Yeah.
And then the other person said, well, that's not what Jesus actually meant.
Yeah.
He said don't piss in bushes while standing on one leg.
Yeah.
What Jesus said becomes empty now.
It doesn't become empty. It just means there's disagreement. just means there's just disagreement.
Okay, all right.
I mean, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. I mean, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. Look, President Obama said a couple of days ago. Hang on a second. President Obama said a couple of days ago that the private sector of our economy was strong, and within hours there was disagreement about what he meant when he said that. Now, because there was disagreement doesn't mean that President Obama doesn't exist. Doesn't mean that President Obama doesn't exist.
No.
It just means there was disagreement, right?
No, that's not my analogy.
And you understand that there's disagreement in religion.
Listen, my analogy is this. Obama says the economy is strong, someone else says it isn't. My analogy would say, just because the both of them say that doesn't mean the economy doesn't exist, because they said that.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with the existence of Obama. It's what Obama said that people were disagreeing on.
Exactly.
So what Obama said is actually true or it isn't true. Either the economy is strong or it isn't strong.
Okay, but we're not. You understand that when we're talking about, are you a person who listened to the news, for example, we're not beholden to answer the question, is what Obama said true? When I describe Christians, for example, I'm not commenting on whether or not their beliefs are true. I'm just trying to point to who they are, to identify them. When I describe Christians, for example, I'm not commenting on whether or not their beliefs are true. I'm just trying to point to who they are, to identify them. And when I say that they disagree with each other, I'm not personally taking a stake on whether or not one group is right or wrong, insofar as I'm just defining the group.
That's my point.
That's your point.
The group doesn't exist because the group has no consensus on what if the economy actually exists.
Wait a minute.
They can't agree on that.
You think that groups that disagree don't exist?
No. Take the Obama example you said.
No, go back to Christianity.
The existence of the economy. Take the teachings of Jesus as that economy.
All right,
let's hold on a second. People can't decide if it exists or not. They say it exists, but they can't tell you what it is.
So what?
If they can't tell you what it is, it doesn't exist.
No, that's not true. Just because people have disagreement on religious ideas, the religion doesn't exist. No, what does that mean?
That's not what I'm saying.
Are you sure that's not what you're saying? Because you keep saying it.
All right, let me see. All right, let me figure this out.
You understand that Christians disagree with each other, right?
Yes, that's...
Okay,
yeah.
so just hold that sentence in your thought and then see if you can disagree with it.
Say that again?
Just hold the sentence in your mind. Christians can disagree with each other, right? That's all I'm saying.
On religion, you mean?
On anything. On religious doctrines, on the teachings of Christ, anything. They can disagree.
All right.
So what? Why is that remarkable?
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay, good, because you keep saying it, but, you know.
Well, you keep misunderstanding me.
All right, well. I guess you don't exist.
Excuse me?
Sorry, I was making a joke. Go ahead.
Well, it wasn't on subject, so...
It was. That's funny. What you keep saying. Anyway, go ahead. Make your
here
point.
It is for you not stupid people.
Okay.
Obama says the economy is strong.
Yeah.
So he's talking about a thing, the economy.
Yes.
Someone says the economy isn't strong.
Yes.
He's talking about a thing, the economy. So they both accepted the economy exists.
Yes.
Whether it is strong or not doesn't matter, because we know it exists. They then would have to decide if it is strong or weak to determine what it actually is. Christians will say, Jesus said this and Jesus said that, which means Jesus said something. So what he said exists.
No, it doesn't actually mean
Let me finish. Now the two Christians have to decide which one of them is right. What Jesus said, which one of them is correct. That is what I'm saying.
You're saying that Christians have difficulty agreeing.
All right, that was my final shot.
Well, that's your point? Christians have difficulty agreeing on things? I agree. They do. Because there was disagreement doesn't mean that President Obama doesn't exist.
Obama says the economy is strong. Someone else says it isn't.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with the existence of Obama. It's what Obama said that people are disagreeing on. So what Obama said is actually true or it isn't true.
You understand that when we're talking about are you a person who listened to the news, for example, we're not beholden to answer the question, is what Obama said true?
Well, I told you once that wasn't what I was saying.
You just said that. You just said that they would have to agree, but they don't.
That's not what I said.
That's what I'm quoting you. They would have to agree.
On what?
In this particular set, you said on what Jesus said.
Yes.
So they disagree about what Jesus said. They would have to agree. They would have to agree.
On what Jesus said to make what Jesus said exist.
No. They don't have to agree. Jesus said something. Hold on a second. Jesus said something at T1, which was like.
No, you just said both of them are right, Ben. There is no wrong.
I never said that. Never did I say that.
That's what your analogy is positing.
No, it's not. No, it's not. I'm not saying that they're both right, that one of them could be wrong. They both could be wrong.
Oh, man. All right.
I'm saying that actually the question of wrongness doesn't come into it. We can define Christians without commenting on rightness and wrongness. Without commenting on rightness and wrongness.
All right. Then we'll agree to disagree on that topic.
Yeah, you're quitting. You're just wrong. Go ahead, keep talking. We'll see what
the comments say when we.
No, keep talking. I really want to hear this point. I think that Christians are something we can talk. We can say what are Christians. We can try our best to define them. We can point to the fact that they frequently.
When we talk about Christians, we're talking about you.
We're talking about me.
Yes.
What about me?
You're a Christian.
If you say so.
So we're talking about you.
If you say so.
If you deny you're a Christian, then there must be something a Christian is. But you can't define that for me. Neither can any other person you call a Christian. So
wait a minute.
If you can't define it, then what is it? It's what anyone says it is. You and those and any other Christian.
Well,
if you can't see this point, then
I can't see it. Your analysis here is based on several several assumptions that are all incorrect. You continually compound this issue of understanding the question of definitions, as if definitions exist only in some sort of metaphysical realm of definitions that are somehow perfect. So let's go all the way back to the question of, can you define a Christian? You asked me this question, like, what is a Christian, right?
Yes.
And I have explained to you that we can draw a line around a group of people called Christians, right? And that when we were drawing this line around Christians, when we were grouping them together, we would group together people who disagree about religious teachings. At this point, you launched several objections the last time I did this. Those objections included that they have to agree.
Yes.
All right. Now, I would like for you to take up the question of why, when defining Christian, do they have to agree?
All right. I'll try. Here we go.
But now, let me ask you, before you get into that too far, let me just point out to you that if I were to define, for example, a politician, right?
Uh-huh.
I would also have to. I would also be defining. I would be drawing a circle around. I would be grouping together people who disagreed about politics. They have different views on the way politics, political decisions and so forth. Certain policies that should be made and so on. Right.
Yes.
But it seems to me like we would acknowledge that clearly they disagree, and I think that we can acknowledge that when we define Christian. But you're going to say that no, and actually in defining Christianity, they have to agree. So do that now. So explain to me why that's the case.
Using the politician. We know politicians exist because you just called someone a politician.
Yeah. There's some Democrats, there's some Republicans.
All right, so we know a politician exists.
Yeah.
So you have two of them.
They disagree.
Please don't speak for me. If you want me to answer your question, well, just let me answer. So you have two politicians. One politician says we have to raise taxes. One says, no, we don't have to raise taxes.
Good.
What are the two politicians talking about? Taxes.
Good.
So taxes exist. How do you raise those taxes? Well, one politician says this way, one politician says that way. I'm not saying either is wrong. They just have two different ideas.
Okay.
Now, the ideas on how to raise taxes does not affect the fact that taxes exist. What is the definition of taxes? If you don't know what the definition of taxes is, you cannot raise taxes. Jesus are the taxes.
All right.
What the Christians want to do is raise Jesus.
All right.
But
Your analogy is completely falling apart.
They have to define what Jesus is to be able to raise Jesus.
All right, your analogy has fallen apart. Let's go all the way back again. There are two groups of people. There are politicians, and some of them disagree about things, right?
Right.
Why do they have to agree in order for us to define politicians?
They have to agree on what taxes are to raise the taxes.
No, they don't. They could disagree on taxes.
Taxes are not defined. There's nothing to raise.
No. All right. Well, you're just moving the goalpost now. There are two groups of people who disagree on what taxes are. Why do we have to define taxes in order?
They don't disagree on what taxes are. They disagree on how to raise them.
So what? They disagree on that too.
So that means they know what taxes are.
So all right, they may.
They disagree on how to raise taxes, but taxes are something that they agree upon.
So all right, first of all, the analogy falls apart because there's no correspondence in the word Christian to the word taxes. So you're moving the goal a little bit here, but again, you're not really answering the question. When two groups of people disagree, they can still be grouped together inside some other label. I mean, obviously, right? I mean,
that's just what my analogy said.
I mean, I can't see why you can't see this. Vegetarians and people who are not vegetarians can both be grouped together inside the label people who eat food, right?
Yes.
So why do you think they have to agree?
Agree on what?
I don't know. You keep saying they have to agree.
No, you keep saying that. You just said vegetarians and.
All right, I was all the way back to the word Christian. You asked me to define the word Christian. It's all the way back to the question of the relationship.
Let's stay on the vegetarian thing.
Okay, let's stay. All right, so there's a group of people.
A vegetarian and a person that is not a vegetarian.
Yes.
Agrees something exists called food. Is that what you're saying?
No, but I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there is a group of people that we can call people who eat food.
Yes.
Right? Within that group, there is disagreement about things like what tastes good and what we should eat and so on, right?
Yes.
Now, just because there's disagreement doesn't mean that we can't draw a circle around the group of people who eat food.
All right, so we'll take that.
All right, now, having said that...
have two people who eat food.
Yes.
So we know food is something.
No. I mean, we do, but it has nothing to do with them defining.
That's my point. If you don't want to, if you can't accept that food is something, and they have to agree upon what food is in order to talk about, some say your particular food is nasty and your particular food, mine is delicious.
Yeah.
They must know what food is. Food must be something.
Well, the fact that food must be something is trivial because, it's not intrinsic to the definition of people who eat food that we define the word food.
Food can be anything. If food is not defined, it can be anything. It can be a rock. It can be food has to be a particular thing.
Well, I mean, ironically, one of the things that they would probably disagree about is what is food. I mean, for example.
Well, that's my point. They disagree on what is food. They can't define food.
And yet we can draw a circle around them. But hold on a second. And yet we can draw a circle around them.
So they don't know what it is. It's what anyone says it is.
Right.
A chair can be a CD. It can be a house.
Well, no, I don't think that's the problem. The problem isn't that then we have to deal with things that are exceptional. Right. But that's what food is, by the way. I mean, food is something that we can randomly draw. I mean, some people think that blood is food, and we can argue over whether or not it's true or not.
All right, I'll try this again. Let's take the blood. People will argue if it's food or not, but the blood actually exists. They're not telling you what the blood is. They're telling you what you can do, what you're supposed to do with that blood.
Okay, so let's go all the way back. So let's return.
Let me finish. The blood is something that exists that must be defined for anyone to tell you what you can do with it.
If you say so. I don't know. I think that's kind of silly. We'll go all the way back to the word Christian, for example. Again, I would say that there are Christians who disagree with each other, and you somehow think that they must agree with each other. Now, without using a
That is not what I'm saying. You continually say that, and I continually tell you that is not my point.
Oh, so that's not your point. What is your point?
No.
Then
The Christians can disagree on what Christianity is.
Good.
But for them to disagree on what Christianity is,
yes,
there must be a Christianity to disagree upon.
What does that mean?
What that Christianity they're disagreeing upon, if it is not defined, it doesn't exist. It has to be defined for them to say what it is, to say someone else is wrong in their opinion of what it is. No one can tell you what it is. So if they're telling someone they're wrong, the other person can just say, well, you're wrong. And they'll say, prove it. And they'll say, well, I can't. I'll say, why not? And they'll say, because I don't know what Christianity is. It's what I say it is.
And so what? Why is that not a very good description of the way the world is? I mean, isn't that the way the world is? That sometimes definitions collapse and we have to say, well, I guess we just have a problem with definitions.
Definitions don't collapse. Christianity has no definition. If you can't see, that's what it is.
So Christianity has no definition?
Say that again?
Christianity has no definition?
Yeah, that's correct. That's my point.
Okay, so you think that there is a religion, but you do not think it exists. It does not have a definition.
That's correct, because everyone chooses what that definition is.
Okay.
They say Jesus brought their religion.
Okay.
Their religion, they can't tell you what Jesus brought, though.
All right, this is really interesting. I want to continue with this line of logic. So now that we've established that,
this is the same logic we've been on for the last 30 minutes.
Yeah, no, this is wonderful. Now that you've agreed that, now that we've established that when people disagree about the definition of a thing, it does not exist. Now that we've established that when people disagree about the definition of a thing, it does not exist. I think that you and I disagree.
That is not what I'm...
Oh, that's not what you're saying.
All right, for the 10,000th time.
Okay.
But to disagree on what something is, it has to exist. But to disagree on it, it must have a definition for you to disagree over.
It must
That's
have
what
a
I'm
definition.
saying.
Oh, okay. So the fact that Christians disagree about what Christianity is means what? That Christianity does exist now? Because you just said it doesn't exist. You said it very, very clearly.
Yeah, stick with that thought.
So which is it? Does Christianity exist or not?
That's the thought.
Which is it?
That's the thought. It doesn't exist.
It does not exist. So once people disagree over the definition of something, the thing does not exist. So once people disagree over the definition of something, the thing does not exist.
Exactly.
That's your point.
That's my point. Christianity does not exist.
Okay. Now, you and I disagree over the definition of superstition.
Yes.
So superstition does not exist.
You mean the word or actual magic?
I don't know. What do you mean by, I mean, I think that's the point. We disagree on the definition. So therefore, according to the reasoning you just established.
Superstition exists because it is in your head. It is in the, if you're superstitious, you're superstitious.
That's well put. Let's go all the way back. Let's recapitulate this one more time.
Superstition exists because people are superstitious. If you disagree on if we disagree on what superstition is, we are disagreeing on something that we call superstition. To disagree on what superstition is, we must next define superstition to see who is right. Do you agree with this?
No, it doesn't even make sense.
Then we will continue. Then we will continue to run in circles.
Yeah, because your sentences actually are not coherent. You say, for example, that people are superstitious, that superstition exists because people are superstitious. You don't think that's a little simplistic?
Say that again? I missed that.
You said that superstition exists because people are superstitious. You don't think that's a little simplistic?
Oh, give me something more evolved.
Well, I mean, what about because they are strong cultural institutions?
What? What?
I'm just saying it's a ridiculously simplistic sentence. And you also, I mean,
they are strong.
We come down to this. Hold on a second. We're still coming down to this question. I still don't know. I know that you keep sighing with with exasperation because you keep having to repeat yourself, but you continually. I'm confounded by this idea that you really honestly and earnestly think.
All right. You're confounded. All right. I'll let you be confounded. Let's drop it. We've already gone over that subject enough. So why don't we move on to. I don't know what you are. You say you're Roman Catholic. I don't know what that is, so I'll ask you a question.
Okay.
Is there an Adam and Eve in Roman Catholicism?
Is there an Adam and Eve? Yeah, they're characters in the book of Genesis.
They're characters. They didn't literally exist.
I would say almost certainly not.
And that's the Roman Catholic teaching.
That is also consistent with Roman Catholicism. Yes, they're almost certainly not exist.
So do you accept the existence of Jesus and that he died for your sins?
I accept the existence of Jesus, and I think that the phrase "died for your sins" has meaning. It's probably not what evangelicals mean by it, which is probably
I'm only talking about you.
What's that?
I'm only talking about you. Tell me what it means to you.
What that phrase means for me.
You accept Jesus existed.
Yeah, I would be amazed if somebody didn't.
Do you believe Jesus was tortured and murdered by other humans as a sacrifice for your sins?
Again, the words are very difficult. We have to make sure we express what they mean. I would say something like this. I would say that what the crucifixion and resurrection represent.
Did Jesus die for your sins or not? That's a yes or no.
Okay, so you understand that I am attempting to demonstrate a more complicated position that can be expressed in the word yes and no. Do you understand that? Yes or no?
So you don't know. I don't know. If someone died for me so I could be forgiven for anything I do, I would think I could answer a question as yes if someone asked me if that was the case.
Right.
I don't think that the issue is the case or not.
Yeah.
Then I guess we may as well just end this now.